a rebrand that went well. In today's landscape, we see a lot of successful shifts in logo, but that doesn't always show us what a rebrand can be. This is where I really want to talk about how to identify that a rebrand is on the cards and a necessary part of your business's evolution, because at some point we'll all most likely have to go through some type of rebrand. If you are just looking to deepen that relationship with your current existing segmentation and group of personas, and if you're not doing it with the intent of bringing new people into the fold, what the heck are you doing a rebrand for? I love working with Pilot House because while we are a performance marketing agency, we really pride ourselves on caring so much about brand and creative. At Pilot House, we don't just make ads, we craft them. Every edit, every word, every scroll-stopping detail is built with purpose and care, and I truly believe that care drives creativity and creativity drives results. Our attention to both scale and brand allows us to craft strategies that deliver you short-term results while making you long-term successful, which is so important for any DTC brand. If you are curious about learning more about working with Pilot House, you can fill out a lead form at pilothouse.co and let them know you want to go on a brand new ad venture. You don't actually have to say that. You don't have to make a pun. I'm not going to force you to make a pun. Just fill out the lead form. We'd love to chat with you. Hi, welcome back to Ad-venturous, the podcast produced by DTC and hosted by me, Aves. Today, I am very excited about our episode. We are talking about a rebrand that went well. We're in the middle of our series on rebrands. Last week, to catch you up if you missed it, we talked about a couple of rebrands that didn't go so well. Cracker Barrel is a very good example of this. That rebrand went so poorly that they ended up reverting to their old logo. And then we also talked about one that's a little bit more current, which is a brand I was formerly unfamiliar with called Tree Hut. And Tree Hut makes body care that's sold in sort of grocery stores, big box stores. And they've recently rebranded. And I thought that the rebrand was very well executed. I thought that while I'm not in the rooms over at Tree Hut, it was very well thought out. But people on the internet just really seem to hate this new logo and this rebrand. So I wanted to talk about it a little bit and sort of diagnose where I think some of that backlash might be coming from. And I said this at the end of last week's episode. Boy, oh boy, do I hate reading negative comments on the internet, which is really crazy considering what my job is, but it just kind of bums me out. It's like, get a hobby, do something more productive, do something more fun. So today, I'm really excited that we get to talk about a rebrand that went very well, in my opinion. And when I was thinking about what brand I wanted to use to talk about the transformative effects that a well-executed rebrand could have, I didn't want to defer to anything overly simplistic. And what I mean by that is in today's landscape, we see a lot of successful shifts in logo, which is pretty hollow and not always indicative of a deeper change. And what I mean by that is that a lot of brands in today's landscape shift their logo to be a little bit more simple, a little bit more minimalistic for very tactical reasons, which is we are experiencing brand and logos predominantly today on products, of course, but on our freaking phones. And those things are small, and it is hard to compress a big, glorious, detailed logo down in a way that looks good as a profile pic on X or Instagram or an app cover. You know what I mean? Logos today have to be a little bit more simple because of the world that we live in, and that's all fine. And there's a lot of very positive examples of that out there, but that doesn't always show us what a rebrand can be. So I had to sort of dust off the history books and flash back a few years, a decade and a half, to find this example. And I also wanted to find an example of a brand who we don't even necessarily associate with a rebrand because they did such a successful job. So to just get into it, I wanted to talk about Old Spice today. Old Spice is a really interesting case study when we think about rebranding because, like I mentioned, a lot of people I don't think necessarily think of Old Spice as a brand that rebranded because their brand is so strong at this point in time. And it did happen in 2010, way back when. I feel like that was the year I got my Wii. It was the best year ever. The best year. I will maybe fact check that if that is the year that the Wii came out. Oh my gosh, that was a year for the books. I played Animal Crossing like you wouldn't believe. And also, they had the Olympics, not to give too many personal anecdotes, in Vancouver, and I was there, and it was so cool, and I got like stuffies of the mascots. Insane. I was putting temporary tattoos on my face of the Olympic rings. It was a wild year in my life, and also a wild year in Old Spice's history. And I think what's really interesting to kind of like start to go through Old Spice and their history, what's really, really interesting about this rebrand in particular is that they had a specific goal, which was way back in 2010, possibly the best year of my life. I will fact check that. Way back in 2010, Old Spice was getting lost amongst net new competitors. I think something, before I get into sort of the history of Old Spice, something that's really exciting to talk about and think about is that Axe body spray had come on the scene a couple of years before with these really exciting ads that were really capturing the attention of younger boys and men. So sort of like 15 to 25, 30, they'd really captured their attention with these sort of like quote unquote regular guy ads where the regular guy was getting the gal because he smelled so good. I was talking to one of my coworkers about this like very fragrant era in the lives of boys and men, and we were sort of trading horror stories of like boys just spraying Axe body spray like publicly. It would like the hallway was not the place or the time to be applying your Axe body spray, but here we were. It obviously, in retrospect, now that I'm an adult and this is my job, it was obviously a very successful marketing campaign to have tween and teen boys going home and telling their mom that they needed them to buy them multiple cans of body spray. And you know what? Upon retrospect as well, as an adult, I'm glad that they had it. It might have been very fragrant and very out there, but I'm glad they had it instead of not having it, which sort of perfectly brings us to the origins of Old Spice. I didn't know this, but Old Spice was actually founded in 1937. So it is geriatric spice, not just old. So it is a historic, old spice, old company at this point. And what's so interesting to me is Old Spice actually started off making scents for women, because scents for men, it was just not something anyone was really considering. In fact, BO was considered masculine back then, which is like, yikes, disgusting. But as sort of thoughts and opinions on that started to change, Old Spice shifted and they started selling products to men, including like a aftershave lotion, sort of soap for shaving. And something that is very interesting to me is they were looking for a way to really infiltrate this new group, this new market, because like I mentioned, scents had been particularly focused on women, not just Old Spice, but anyone selling any kind of personal care. Like a guy smelling, I guess, gross, and like BO was again considered very masculine. So it's an interesting place to be in historically when you're starting to sell a product to a group of people we've historically told don't need a product. But something that I found really interesting was this tie-in with the nautical theme, because I'd never really considered the sailboat aspect of Old Spice or why it might be there, but they started including actual boats that had like gone on these missions, which I think is really cool as a way to sort of signal who the brand was and what they were doing, which again, very interesting. So they stuck with the nautical theme. It worked very well. And Old Spice started to do what all brands do when selling any kind of fragrance or body care to men, which was telling men that women would like them more if they bought this product, which is kind of a bulletproof angle for a lot of men, especially back there. If you think about like, we jump forward from 1937 to like the 60s and 70s and the 80s too, like that type of messaging just really, really stuck with men in particular. And there wasn't really a lot of thought back then because there was maybe not a lot of non-men in the rooms where these conversations were being had, but there wasn't a lot of thought around who was actually buying these products. We were really just thinking about the end consumer, and I think it's important to keep that in mind as we keep kind of talking about the evolution of Old Spice, because it is very important to think about who actually buys body care for men. Anyway, very simple, very, I don't want to say unexciting, but kind of very traditional messaging for Old Spice. Again, buy these products, they smell nice, they'll do the job, they'll get you the lady. Cut the check, we're done. But as I mentioned, competitors started to pop up. So this was in, the 90s, 2000s. Scents for Men started to become way more popular, specifically for young men, and that was, as Axe showed us, a very profitable group of people to message to. And Axe started doing something in the 2000s, like I mentioned before, that really blew everyone out of the water and also just grew the category of scents for young men in particular. And that's a really, I think, important note here, is that the market itself shifted as well. So Old Spice, it's been around at this point for a decade, founded in 1937. Axe comes on the scene. They're just doing things differently than everyone else, carving out a sort of net new market and also delivering ads that are so bombastic that nobody else can really compete with them. But what can happen is a sort of bloating of the category. So lines that had previously only made products for women started focusing on products for both genders, and that's kind of when we would probably start to see the shift sort of in the 2000s of steel scented body wash starting to hit the stores more often, because male body care started to become just more of a cultural norm. And so all of the big players like Dove, they were starting to get into the sort of rat race of male body care. Really interesting, really important. Old Spice, like I mentioned, geriatric spice. It's such an established company, and the branding was quite old-fashioned. Back then, a sailboat really was the pinnacle of masculinity in a way. But when you put that next to what Axe was doing in their advertising materials, and also just the way that an Axe body spray looked on the shelf, if I am a 16-year-old boy, there is no way in 2008 I am going for the old man sailboat. I'm obviously going for Axe. It was cool, sleek. It just made sense that it was a more popular product. And so Old Spice fading in the background, what do? They've got options. And this is where I really want to talk about how to identify that a rebrand is on the cards and a necessary part of your business's evolution, because at some point we'll all most likely have to go through some type of rebrand. But Old Spice had been around and they'd done quite well, but what was happening was there was this new emerging market of millennials that they had no idea how to service. And that is really, really important. I think when we look at last week's episode, Tree Hut and Cracker Barrel as well, those rebrands didn't do anything to bring someone new into the fold. They were just shifting the way that things looked a little bit. It was more of a lateral move, where Old Spice did something to blow up their old brand and create room for net new customers who they desperately needed at this point in time. So the thing that I find most of the time when folks bring a rebrand to the table, when I'm talking to brands, auditing them, what have you, most of the time we're looking at a rebrand. When I mentioned this last week, we really should be looking at more of a relevancy issue to our current customer than, oh my gosh, we need to completely throw things out and start new with a fresh rebrand. Rebrands should, in my opinion, be reserved for brands who do desperately need to unlock a net new audience segment. It's not oh, things aren't going that well, let's do a rebrand and kind of see what we can do. In my opinion, if things aren't going that well and you're starting to see things stagnate a little bit, you need to breathe life into the brand that you've already built and continue to dig a deeper relationship with your target segmentation and personas through your existing brand. But when you just need to talk to net new people, a rebrand is the way to go. So something that I think is really, really interesting about what Old Spice did was that they most likely looked around, they saw what everyone else was doing, they saw what they'd been doing, which is talking to men about how their body care products were going to be the ones that got them the most girls. And instead, Old Spice did something really, really smart, was they decided to address women and also, in a way, men at the same time. And so that brings us to the 2010, very, I would say, famous, iconic, if not, ad that they did with Isaiah Mustafa called "The Man Your Man Could Smell Like." Something so weird. And the pacing of it is so different than a lot of different ad campaigns. It was formulaically made to speak directly to millennials. And I just can't say it enough. Millennials invented the internet being funny, cut the cameras. It happened when millennials were like running the internet. It was peak. It was the funniest it will ever be. We all ruined it in Gen Z. It's not fun anymore. It's lame. It's stupid. But "The Man Your Man Could Smell Like," I think, is such an excellent example of a 2010s millennial-focused ad. Like I mentioned, the pacing of it is so odd. The concepting is so funny. And the way that they rolled it out was so genius. And I'm not sure if they knew exactly what would happen because it was so net new, but it was so incredibly smart. And if you don't know this about the first "The Man Your Man Could Smell Like" ad, it came out around the Super Bowl. And we all love to talk about Super Bowl ads, except for me. I don't find them incredibly interesting, to be honest. But instead of running this spot on the Super Bowl Live, what they did was they put it online. And I know putting an ad on the internet is something that I do like a bunch of times a week. Like I make so many ads and then they go on the internet. So it is not something that's so interesting in today's cultural landscape. But back then it was just a different way to roll out a spot that they'd put so much effort and energy into. You know, they weren't playing this thing on TV. They just uploaded it to the little old internet, which didn't have the same gravity as it does today. And so what's so interesting to me as well is we have a football player in our new ambassador for the brand, and we have one of the biggest moments in advertising, which is linked to football. And instead of sort of playing the same game as everyone else, they did something different with their delivery of the advertising materials, which I think is so genius. And they thought very clearly about where millennials would actually see this piece of content. And this is something that I think loops directly into work that we all do as advertisers today, which is really thinking about where content is showing up, whether we're thinking about, utilizing content focused placements on YouTube, or we're thinking about reel placement versus desktop placement. Also, it's like desktop placement, I always find really wacky. Who is using Facebook on their desktop? I don't know. It's incredible the amount of people who still do though. But, it's like so interesting to think about. That was 16 years ago now. And there's still so many similarities between how important it is to pay attention to those little details like this. Because when you're making such a big swing, you want to make sure that every small piece is going to fall perfectly into place. And I think delivery is one of the most overlooked pieces of that. It would have been really easy for Old Spice to say, okay, we're doing this big rebrand. Let's blow it up at the Super Bowl. But instead, they, like I mentioned, really thought deeply about where millennials would actually go to interact with this ad. And because the ad itself, which I'm working under the assumption that you've seen it, because if you were interested in advertising, it is a very famous ad, but it's so funny and so entertaining that it has a really high rewatchability, which means that your views on that video that you uploaded are going to climb up and up and up, which even back then did matter and did show some kind of legitimacy to the work that Old Spice was doing. I want to mention as well, I kind of briefly talked about this, that for the first time, a body care brand for men was thinking specifically about women in the way that they advertised. And you can really tell from, of course, the way that the initial ad plays out. Look at your man, look back to me. It's very obvious, but I want to sort of call upon the difference between Old Spice and Axe at that time. And I want to talk a lot about purchasing power because that is another really important detail that Old Spice got right. So I don't know if there are any teenagers listening to this. I guess more likely that you have teenage children, but they're not buying their own body care. I have to make some assumptions, especially teenage boys. They might have strong preferences, but they do not have the purchasing power. What is very typical in a nuclear family dynamic is that mom is going to go to the grocery store or she's going to run to Walmart or Target, and while she's there, she is picking up essentials for every single member of the family. That includes the husband, and that includes any boys still living in the house. And so making a brand that feels friendlier to that mom's point of view is such a smart choice because she, like I mentioned, has the purchasing power, not just for one person, but most likely for multiple people in her household and orbit. So you're really making a much more efficient play than, say, advertising directly to these teenage boys who maybe have to save up their pennies to buy some Axe or like beg their parents. Making these ads that were designed to capture the attention of women, really genius move, and really sort of 2-for-1 as well, because I think the sentimentality around masculinity and what it means to be a man was in a really interesting place in 2010, for example. I love my hipsters. I love Mumford & Sons. Incredible. And so there's also like a wink, wink, nudge, nudge quality to both the initial ad, the man your man could smell like, but also subsequent materials that they made after they rebranded, that it does capture that vibe, I think, of millennial manhood in a way that Axe was doing for slightly younger demographics, but Old Spice was now offering something to more established actual millennials who had money to purchase their own products. And then at the same time, it was appealing to women who were purchasing for those younger men and also for slightly older men. So what really is striking to me, again, about the difference between this example today, Old Spice, and what we talked about last week was that the difference in the goal for someone like Tree Hut, who just wanted to update how their products looked, versus Old Spice, who said, holy shit, things are not going well. We are not appealing to this net new base of customers. We're getting pantsed on the ad side. Like, people are showing up way cooler than us. They're showing up with a way more enticing product for this net new consumer base coming out. What are we going to do? And so this is sort of what I was alluding to earlier in this episode, and we talked about it in the last episode too. You have to be really careful about when you deploy a rebrand. If you are just looking to, like I mentioned, deepen that relationship with your current existing segmentation and group of personas, a rebrand is probably not the way to do it, because what's going to happen is you're going to isolate some people. And if you're not doing it with the intent of bringing new people into the fold, what the heck are you doing a rebrand for, you know? But like I mentioned, Old Spice, they were in the situation where a rebrand was completely necessary. And while I don't wish being in that situation upon anyone listening to this podcast, I think that is when you have to seriously start considering a rebrand versus, more of an effort to be relevant and to really engage with your current segmentation and personas. So yeah, I think what should really be illuminated by these two different episodes is the goal of a rebrand has to be net new acquisition and not just like finding new people within the segment that you've already identified. It has to be like a Hail Mary SOS, let's try a rebrand. And I think that I have that belief because I have been, very fortunate to work on brands where the brand itself is just so good already. So I would caution you, if you'd like to, launch your brand or start something new, to really think deeply about these really important elements of brand, which are, what are the story? How are we looping, a founder story, and if possible, because brands who do this from the beginning are the ones that are by far the most successful. If we're just sort of haphazardly throwing together some colors that we think look nice together, and we put together a logo we think is kind of cool, it's simple, so it shows up well on the apps, that is not really a brand. And rebrands to me always inspire deeper thought and conversation around brand identity itself, because to completely shift how you're showing up in the marketplace as a product is a really, really big deal. And I think, again, this Old Spice example, if you're founded in 1937, flash forward to 2010, things are going to be different, and you are going to find yourself in a situation where your customers have unfortunately passed on and you need to identify new ones. And sometimes things just shift and culture changes. And like I mentioned, the sort of nautical theme and a sailboat was once this symbol of masculinity. But if you asked a dude in 2010 if a sailboat was giving young masculine man, no, they would have said no. Of course, it was giving, I feel like, old man and Old Spice. And so it's really like important. I feel like I've said this like 4 times now, but it's really important to consider what you are doing when you're doing a rebrand, so as to make sure that you're not just sort of painting over work that's already been done and hasn't actually gotten its best chance to flourish and survive. And one of those ways you can do that is, like I mentioned previously, by identifying if you are just having a hard time resonating and finding streaks of relevancy within already established personas in your segmentation, or if you need to start talking to net new people altogether. This is a really central part to how we think about strategy at Pilot House. We really develop our complete strategic framework around segmentation and personas and thinking about who we're talking to. And so it's kind of step 1 for us in our work when we look to how to grow and scale a partner. Are we talking to the right people is the first thing that any of us really think about or look at. And so you should apply that same thinking when you are looking or thinking about a rebrand or just feeling a little bit stuck. You should think, are we talking to the right people? If not, who are the right people? If you don't know the answers to those questions, you can book a call. I love to talk about this kind of thing. If you go to our website directly and fill out our little lead form, we can start to kind of figure that out together. Like I mentioned, I really like looking at this type of thing because it is really interesting and it does take a lot of thought and I think a lot of opinions to make the right decision. So that option is always there. This was a much more fun episode than, like I mentioned last week, diving into why people were hating on Tree Hut so much. On the other side, talking about why Old Spice worked so well. It came from, looking to service a different part of the segmentation that was buying this category. They did something really smart with their delivery, and they did something really smart with their angle, and they did something really fun and unique with the way that they executed this ad campaign. And it's just, it's very fun to watch. If you haven't watched it in a while, it's still funny. I feel like that's also really cool 16 years later, and these ad concepts are still quite funny. And I also wanted to mention that the success of this rebrand is not just measured in cultural relevancy. If you check into it, Old Spice's sales went through the frickin' roof after they executed this rebrand, which is a really obvious sign that it worked out well and it was a good idea and it made sense to do. But I wanted to point that out because it wasn't just, cultural relevancy. People were actually buying this product because of this rebrand, which is what we can all dream of and hope for. But that was the episode for today, a lot more positive. Next week, we're going to talk about how to capture intent in this new omnipresent brand era and this new weird personal brand era. We're going to talk about how to tie ourselves as brands into these conversations, which I think will be fun, maybe a little dystopian. Maybe I'll watch The Matrix as I prepare for it. I love The Matrix. I saw it for the first time last year. It was really good. Anyway, that is what we'll be talking about next week. And thanks so much for listening. And I'll chat to you guys next week.